My college roommate destroyed my career by stealing my research. His desperate call 10 years later was my vindication. I, 35 am, was sitting in my home office last Tuesday when a name I hadn't seen in a decade flashed across my phone screen. The same name that had haunted my career, my ambitions, and my trust in people for years. My stomach dropped as I stared at the notification, debating whether to answer or let it go to voicemail like I should have done 10 years ago when he first started using my work. "Please," he said when I finally picked up. His voice was different, strained, desperate. Not the confident tone that had charmed talk show hosts and conference audiences for years. "I need your help. I really messed up." For context, we were roommates at a prestigious university where I was working on my PhD in biochemistry. I was never the social butterfly, more comfortable with petri dishes than people. He was the opposite, charismatic, well-connected, and with a gift for explaining complex concepts to anyone. What he lacked was the patience for the actual research. We shared an apartment off campus for 3 years. I thought we were friends. He'd bring home takeout when I worked late. I'd proofread his sparse papers when deadlines loomed. It seemed like a fair balance at the time. My research focused on a novel enzyme pathway that could potentially revolutionize certain pharmaceutical applications. Nothing that would make headlines in mainstream media, but significant in our field. I spent countless nights in the lab, meticulously documenting every result, every failure, every breakthrough in my notebooks and on my laptop. The morning it happened, I'd been pulling an all-nighter, trying to fix an unexpected issue with my experimental design. I'd finally solved it around 5 a.m. and crashed hard, leaving my laptop open on the kitchen table with all my research notes accessible. When I woke up that afternoon, something felt off. My roommate was unusually interested in my progress, asking pointed questions about my methodology. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed he was being supportive. 3 months later, I was preparing to present my findings at a conference when my advisor called me into his office. He was holding a scientific journal open to an article with my roommate's name as the lead author. The methodology, the results, even some of the phrasing was unmistakably mine. "Care to explain this?" my advisor asked, his expression a mixture of disappointment and suspicion. I felt physically ill reading through the paper. It was my work I hadn't even published yet, with minor cosmetic changes and his name attached to it. When confronted, my roommate claimed we had collaborated and that I had verbally agreed to let him take the lead. A complete fabrication. What followed was a nightmare of academic politics. It was his word against mine, and he had submitted the paper first. He had also networked with all the right people while I had been hunched over lab equipment. The university launched an investigation, but these things move slowly, and in the meantime, he was already being invited to speak at prestigious events. I eventually received some acknowledgement of my contribution, but the damage was done. His career skyrocketed while mine stalled. He became the public face of the research, appearing in science magazines, and eventually securing a lucrative position at a major pharmaceutical company. Meanwhile, I had to essentially start over, shifting my focus to a different area to distance myself from the controversy. For years, I watched from the sidelines as he built his reputation on the foundation of my work. He expanded on it, sure, but that initial breakthrough, the one that opened all those doors, that was mine. I eventually found my footing, built a respectable career, and tried to put the whole experience behind me. I never reached the heights he did, but I made peace with that. I got married, bought a house, and found satisfaction in my work at a smaller research institution where people valued integrity. So when his name appeared on my phone after a decade of silence, all those old feelings came rushing back. "I'm being investigated," he admitted after I let the silence stretch uncomfortably long. "They're saying I falsified data on the follow-up study to your enzyme pathway." I almost laughed. "And what does that have to do with me?" "They're reviewing all my research now, including the original paper. If they find out He paused, finally unable to directly admit what he'd done. "I'll lose everything." "That sounds like a personal problem," I replied coldly. "Please," he said again. "I need your notes from back then. The original research. If I can show them the methodology was sound. You want me to help you continue lying? To provide you with more of my work to pass off as yours?" I couldn't believe his audacity. "I have a family now," he said quietly. 2 kids. If this falls apart." That gave me pause. I hadn't known he had children. But did that change anything? "I can publicly acknowledge your contribution," he offered desperately. "Full credit. I can make it right." 10 years too late, I thought. But part of me wondered if this could be the vindication I'd never received. Another part wondered if helping him continue the research, properly credited this time, would be better for science than watching it all fall apart. "I need time to think," I said finally, and hung up. That night, I told my wife everything. She already knew the broad strokes, but not how deeply it had affected me. "What do you want to do?" she asked after listening intently. Part of me wants to watch him crash and burn, I admitted. But another part wonders if I'd be hurting others, his family, people who could benefit from the research, just to satisfy an old grudge. She nodded thoughtfully. Those kids didn't steal your research. The next day, I called him back. I'll send you the original data, I said. But I have conditions. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. He looked different, grayer, with deep lines around his eyes. Success had aged him prematurely, or maybe it was the constant fear of being discovered as a fraud. I handed him a flash drive. Everything from the original research is there. But here's what happens next. You issue a formal correction to the original paper, listing me as co-author. You publicly acknowledge my contribution at your next speaking engagement. And you establish a scholarship at our old university focused on scientific ethics. He stared at the small drive in his hand like it contained his salvation, which in a way, it did. I'll do all of it, he said immediately. If you don't, I've arranged for copies of our correspondence and proof of the original theft to be sent to the investigating committee, I added. His face paled, but he nodded. Walking away from that coffee shop, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for 10 years. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for myself, for those kids who didn't deserve to pay for their father's mistakes, and for the scientific community that could still benefit from our combined work. True to his word, 2 weeks later, I received notification of the correction to the original paper. A month after that, I was invited to join him on stage at a conference where he publicly acknowledged that the groundbreaking work had been primarily mine. The scholarship was established by the end of the quarter. We're not friends. We probably never will be again. But we've established a cautious professional relationship. His career took a hit from the revelations, but he didn't lose everything. And mine finally received the boost it deserved a decade ago. Last week, we submitted a new paper together, a true collaboration this time, with my name listed first. It feels like closing a circle that had been left painfully open for too long. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's rising to your rightful place beside them and knowing that they know you belong there. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect this post to blow up like it did. To address some common questions. 1. Yes, I could have refused to help him and let his career implode, but that wouldn't have given me the public acknowledgement I deserved. 2. No, I don't feel like I rewarded him for stealing. The public correction was humiliating for him and significantly impacted his reputation in the field. 3. For those asking about legal action, the statute of limitations had passed, and academic intellectual property cases are notoriously difficult to prove, especially after so much time. 4. Several people have suggested I could have asked for financial compensation. Maybe, but the scholarship will help students for years to come, which feels more meaningful than a one-time payment. 5. To the commenter who called me a doormat, getting my name on the original research and establishing myself as the primary innovator in our field was always my goal. I've achieved that now. Sometimes playing the long game is better than immediate satisfaction. 6. And yes, we're working together now because the research is important and could help a lot of people. I can separate my personal feelings from the work. Thanks for all the supportive comments. It's been a long road, but I finally feel like justice has been served, even if it took a decade longer than it should have.